This is December 30th, 2021. It's the eve of the new year. It's actually January 1, 2023. And when I sat down with my twin brother Ricardo to do that brief introduction to the episode, it was December 30th, December 31st, 2022. So, correction. Let's continue with Ricardo and I. And for this series of the Neoliberal Round, Ricardo and Ronaldo will be performing several songs as the McKenzie brothers ringing in the new year and closing out the old. Well, I'm not sure about singing, but Ricardo hasn't joined us. Ricardo hasn't been on the show in a while. We did a show in, I think, the first season of the show. The first season, I think it's the fourth episode. Ricardo joined us, and we did an episode, part one, on relationships. Are we going to be able to tell our voices differently? I don't know if people know us separately. I think they do. I am Ronaldo, and beside me is Ricardo McKenzie. It's good. It's good to connect with Ricardo here as we do our last episode for 2021, and we look back at 2021. The Neoliberal Realm podcast is a global podcast, and we have over 4,808 minutes of podcast. We are how many followers? I'm not sure how many followers we have, but in terms of how many, we are at 3,000 plays, and we want more plays than that. We're hoping to. We want to 3,000 plays on the Anchor Spotify platform, but I don't know how many plays on the other platforms. But right now the Apple Podcast is our biggest platform. Most of the people listen to our podcast via Apple. Is that not bad? And then Spotify. Anchor was way down, but Anchor is coming up. But what we are trying to do, we want more people to support the podcast. We're supposed to be. We can open up subscription. We have subscription that's enabled on the podcast. But we're not going to do that. We want people to come. The podcast will continue to be free, and people can donate whenever they want to, and listen to it whenever they want to. This is the Neoliberal Realm podcast. We'll be right back after this. Have a happy new year from the Neoliberal Round podcast. So I was thinking today about consciousness, mind, body, and this idea of death, dying, and beyond. And in retrospect, I did a course some time ago, phenomenology, and phenomenology is the study of the mind. And while studying and while reading for that course, I was doing some external reading and found a book The book was called Death, Dying and Beyond, and it was quite revealing and quite interesting. And it was just recently while watching a movie, probably on Netflix or Amazon Prime, can't recall. I was watching a movie. Actually, it's not a movie. Is it a movie? I think it was. And the father had abducted the daughter and killed a very good friend of his ex. But in the van, in the movie, there is a several prominent scenes where this book, Death, Dying and Beyond, came. And the movie, of course, was about a lot of killing, a lot of dying, and a lot of death, actually. But it got me thinking. But today, as I was going about, I started thinking, doing some deep thinking about human beings, about life, about reality, about consciousness. And people have always delved in this idea of the conscious. Of course, if you study psychology and if you study people like Sigmund Freud, he talks about the conscious and the subconscious and the unconscious. But the conscious the conscious, I notice I'm going to use the word the conscious, or consciousness, plays a very important part in life. Consciousness, that's what consciousness, to speak of consciousness, to speak of awareness. To be conscious is to be aware. Consciousness is what helps us to make, and what it is that facilitates consciousness is the human beings are set up in such a way that feeds our the conscious. The material, which is the flesh, which houses the immaterial, which is our conscious. And this awareness, this consciousness, is fed by the feelings associated with the material that connects to the immaterial. So when there is no material, then there is no feeling. There is nothing that connects the material to the immaterial, that sends signals. This awareness is about awareness of reality, awareness of one's present state, of one's current state. One's awareness of what is now, comes from one's consciousness, having consciousness, which speaks to awareness, and that awareness is fed by the feelings, the emotions, and that which extends from the material that is connected to the immaterial, which is part of the conscious. So when there is death, when we talk about death and when there is dying, I say to you, when the material ceases to exist, ceases to continue, then what it is that happens? Death is happening. It is this consciousness loses that touch with the reality of that, the current state of its current state, the current state of the material that houses it. So when we think about consciousness and death in that sense, earlier I was having a discussion with several people about, as we age, as we get older, and I'm now in my 40s, and next year I'm looking at 44. As we get older, you say, "Oh my God, I'm inching closer to 60." The reality of death and the reality of dying and the reality of the beyond even comes much more closer. And the Bible talks about in Ecclesiastes that we're supposed to have fun, live life while the sun shines in our youth. But don't forget that old age is coming. And then the reality, then one become conscious of within one's present state of a future reality. But when we talk about consciousness, where does the conscious go? This awareness. When we lose awareness of what is, then what happens? Where does this consciousness go? Where does the conscious go? the present, because as I said to you, the consciousness helps to give one awareness of the current and present state of reality. This is quite interesting. We'll explore this some more. That was Ricardo and I singing at an HR corporate event some time ago. Quite powerful, was it not? Strong voices, yes, with the other persons in the background try to follow. This is the Nearly podcast. We are sharing moments from our history as we go into 2023. We're looking forward to it. You know, I was looking at our top stories. The top story, we look at our year in review. I was looking at our top story for, our top podcast episode. An all-time top episode is the coverage we did on the Russian war. But there are other notable episodes that we did. We did a breaking news, another murder in Philadelphia. We did that was top podcast, and that was tied with also breaking news. John Anthony Castro to file a complaint against the FEC and Donald Trump regarding Donald Trump's eligibility. That was tied with the number one story we did. In second place was Teaching Theology Today and WAYY. I did a podcast on Teaching Theology Today and WHYY. I was challenging the WHYY story and also sharing some concepts. I think it was that particular story. It's called Teaching Theology Today and WHYY. It's news on Delaware students' academic proficiency used bad data. That was one of our top podcasts. And there was also, that was the third, that was the second. So the top podcast was Breaking News. Another murder in Germantown, Philadelphia. How banks and bookstores are putting in poverty. COVID and laziness at work and HBO's House of the Dragon, featuring Ricardo McKenzie and Marisa Smith. That was our top podcast for the last 90 days and of the year. And of course, tied in first place was breaking news: Castro to file a complaint against the FEC on Trump's candidacy, and the Roe conversations. There was also, of course, we said teaching theology was second, and of course, third was street vibe, pulse of the street, beyond the violence, communities gather for fun and solidarity. That was one of our top podcasts of the year, 2022. We also did published April 2022 series on privilege, power, position, and secrets to unlocking divine intervention by Ricardo McKenzie. That was among the top 4, and in 5th place was When, How, and Why, the neoliberal round anniversary episode featuring Sheldon McKenzie and Dante Nelson, where I was interviewed by Sheldon McKenzie and also Dante Nelson featured on that episode. That was that round of the top 5, and there were others notable episodes. There was also What's Life Like Living in Philadelphia. That was a podcast series that we did. We did parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't know if you had got to 5. We also did What's Wrong with Philadelphia. That was in What's Wrong with Philadelphia. American Cities and the World Today, featuring M. Smith and R. Travis. Again, that was among the top. A notable episode we did. There was also neoliberalism, globalization, economic quality, poverty, and resistance. The preface that was in the top 10, and there was also New Zealand investment scams, the way of Eastern Project Financial Management Services, EPFMXAUE. That was a powerful podcast. If you haven't heard that one, you gotta refer to it. It was something that we uncovered, an investment fraud or scam, trying to people who were trying to get our information. And that was in the top 9. And then to round up the top 10 was the interview I did with John Anthony Castro, the U.S. 2024 presidential candidate. That was, and to round up the top 10 podcasts of the year. And of course, the Russian podcast, the podcast we did about Russia, what's happening in Russia, was the all-time number 1 episode in terms of it had over 150 listen or plays for that one episode alone. But in terms of just in the last 90 days and just 2022, those round up the top 10. This is the Neoliberal Podcast. Thank you for listening to us and supporting us. And just so you know, you can support us by going to anchor.fm/theneoliberal/support. Socrates says, or wrote, or so they say, this quite poignant and powerful gem of a statement: the unexamined life is not worth living. And I've oftentimes said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Since I was in undergrad at the Jamaica Theological Seminary, or oftentimes that's been my quote. But as I was doing some reflecting today, as we began this new year, 2023, I was praying and I said, and by the way, I said I wasn't going to go to any parties or clubs or do whatever. I was going to use the time to reflect quietly. It was a time of solitude to reflect on the past year and to think about this new year. What is it I hope to achieve? What worked well last year and what didn't work well that I can bring into this year, so on and so forth. What didn't work well, what new project, what are some of the things I want to do for this year, and so on and so forth. But as we think about this unexamined life, I started doing some reflecting today and praying, and I started to think deeply on this unexamined life is not worth What is this unexamined life that's not worth living? A life without examination. The unexamined life. Now here we're talking about self-examination. Have you ever sat an exam? I mean a real exam. Exams are tough. So this examination that Socrates is here talking about is not a surface level exam where a quick review of one's life. It is as if we are standing in front of a mirror and we are looking at ourselves in the mirror, deeply at ourselves, seeing our flaws, seeing what we don't usually see. It's not surface level. And sometimes, and a previous episode I talk about this reflecting, this critical examination of self. It requires honesty, an honest reflection of self. In order for us to get to the next level, as we think about this upcoming year 2023, the unexamined life, a life without examining, not just any examination, but real examining, tough examination, is not worth living. Some persons cannot do self-evaluation. Some people cannot do that. Some people cannot truly reflect on self, because every time we have to, you have to deject oneself or eject oneself, whatever it is, from this human stubbornness, this blindness. We talk about I remember when you study counseling psychology, there's one particular book that I read some years ago while studying graduate level counseling psychology at the Jamaica Theological Seminary. It was a program, but I was at CGST, Caribbean Graduate School of Theology, and I was in a counseling course, and we looked at the helping profession, and one of them, this particular book, and it became my Bible, even as I was a pastor doing marriage counseling and counseling my members and parishioners and so on, back in the days when I used to pastor. But this was very important. This whole idea of examining self, truly examining self. So let's use this time to reflect on self. And to be truly critical of self, but not to be pessimistic as we think about 2023. Oh, and by the way, I was making a point about my studies at graduate school, at CGST, studying counseling psychology. And there's this particular book that speaks to when people come to the counseling profession, or people seek out helpers because they are dealing with problems that they feel as though they cannot resolve. And so they seek out help. Now, when you seek out help, now, the people who are doing the helping professional, the first thing the helping professional understands is that the helping profession is geared towards them now when the persons who are looking for help to resolve issues that he thinks he cannot deal with. Part of the helping profession, or the helper in the helping profession, is to help or to empower the individual to first remove the blind spot. This word blind spot is important. Blind spots
Blind spots are things that stand in the way. They are detractors or distractions, or things that are that prevent us from experiencing, from resolving whatever problem we're dealing with. When you come to the helping profession, the helper is helping you to see you and empowering you. And there are things, that blind spots that the helper is going to help you to see, that you need to remove in order for you to get to the level. And so when we talk about, when Socrates talk about this examination, the unexamined life, it involves removing blind spots in our lives, or removing blind spots. And in sometimes us, the pride that we have, sometimes prevents us from seeing us. And it could be that we don't have enough pride, or it could or self-worth, so on and so forth. And of course, this involves what we are talking about here. This conscious awareness, this examination of self, involves the use of our consciousness. It involves a level of consciousness, it involves the conscious. It involves developing awareness, the awareness that is facilitated by brainal activity and the mind. And of course, there is also challenges to even this particular idea about how the brain works. But whatever the case is, we all can agree that as we endeavor to move beyond the problems of 2022, we will need to do honest reflection. As Socrates says, the unexamined life is not worth living. And this examination is an exam that we ourselves must sit, and it may involve seeking out helpers that will help us to remove blind spots and any other distraction and detractions that stand in our examination in order to get to the next level. Happy New Year from the Neoliberal Podcast.